This is Sam Kirby, host of Cinema Stories. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is John Lauder, host of The Cheap Seats here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, The Cheap Seats, where we talk about sports from the fans' perspective. A new show comes out every Monday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of The Cheap Seats. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hey everyone, welcome to Beauties and Headcanons, where we're nerdy and you probably are too. This is Elisabeth and I'm here today with Brice, and we're here to talk nerdy to you. For those of you who are new, Brice was previously on this show when the Ant-Man and the Wasp trailer dropped, and we discussed what we might see in this upcoming movie. And now that the movie is out and we've seen it, he's back to talk about the movie. So just keep in mind that this episode is not spoiler-free, so you have been warned. Now is your chance to stop the episode until you get a chance to see the movie if you don't want to hear any spoilers. So anything is on your head if you hear something you didn't want to hear. Now, before we do begin, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Squadcast, who is sponsoring this episode. As podcasters who all live in different states and a lot of times different time zones, one of the most important things when we record is the quality of our audio together, since we all record remotely. Current solutions like Skype, which we have used in the past, and Zoom are more dependent on internet quality. And Squadcast is just a simple browser-based tool that requires no additional software to install. The audio is just recorded locally as a high-quality WAV file, and then it's uploaded to the guest computer once you're done. We've been using them for a few weeks now, and we absolutely love the experience. If you want to get started, you can go to squadcast.fm for your 14-day free trial. That's squadcast.fm for free 14-day trial. And now, Brice, I know in the last episode we had quite a bit of discussion about what we might see in this movie as far as the villains, as far as the different characters, and I'm curious as to how that all played out with your expectations.
Well, my expectations were higher, I think, than what the movie had progressed, but I thought, as I watched the trailer more and more, I thought it was either going to be really good or really bad, and they ended up kind of split in the middle in terms of being something along the lines of like a Blade 2 or something like that, where it's not necessarily the worst movie ever, and even as a standalone, it's really enjoyable. But as part of the overall MCU experience, I don't think it's up to snuff as the rest of them have been, just because they tried doing some things differently. They're trying to fight the superhero MCU fatigue, and they have to do things differently because of that. And it kind of created a different type of movie. We didn't see a traditional bad guy in this movie. We saw Hank Pym's traditional aspects of being a jerk and just a terrible human being as probably the second most hated hero in Marvel Universe behind Cyclops.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So like you have that and all the bad that he's done with the good that he's done. And it really showed in this movie because it created a comparison movie. You weren't just getting different motives. You weren't getting a clash. It was interesting to see how many ways the different motives of the heroes and the villains, and I'll call them the survivalists in Goliath and Ghost, were to actually getting their hands on the technology that went around like the football, like we kind of talked about in the previous episode, but also the parent-daughter roles of, you had basically single dads in Bill Foster with Ghost and Hank Pym with Hope, and you saw different parenting techniques kind of come out with that. You saw in the original Ant-Man, you saw Corey Stoll's Yellow Jacket go mad because of the results of the sickness of all the experimentation that he was doing, and that wasn't something that could be fixed. In this one, you had also Ghost, who was, again, fighting an illness because of a terrible situation that had happened to her at no fault of her own. Mm-hmm. And she was able to be saved in a lot of ways. And, like, at least not permanently saved, but saved partially. And it kind of created this, like, Dr. Freeze versus Mr. Freeze backstory issue that now...
Yeah, I really like that. I like that they kind of put a little bit more thought into some of their villains, at least, rather than just,
well, I mean,
he's a bad guy.
do, but in terms of the overall movie, it just kind of meant that there wasn't a bad guy.
Yeah, the thing is, I think I do lament Hollywood in general kind of getting stuck in a rut as far as, writing things go, and the fact that that at least this movie moved away from kind of a traditional, this is a bad guy and this is a good guy and they're fighting each other kind of movie. I think the move itself is good, if not the execution is good, if you understand what I'm saying, because, there's all kinds of different stories out there and not all of them have a clear-cut villain or a clear-cut blameless hero, So I think that the move away from a more traditional storyline like that is good, even if the execution itself isn't necessarily the best, if that makes sense.
It does. I think the difference with that is that we've seen that done already thanks to the first Ant-Man. And what I dislike about things is that if you were to have like Iron Man or Black Panther go out there and face the same type of bad guy twice, and that would be your first and second movie, then you would not like it. And we saw an ambiguous bad guy that lost his conscience, essentially. And Bill Foster's character, I thought, was really good in that regard. I think the casting of Lawrence Fishburne was really good in results of actually providing that Jiminy Cricket on the shoulder of Ghost when she's got everything going against her and she's in full panic mode. He can still calm her down and bring her on the right side of morality, even though there's a big fight to be had at the same time. And so I do like that. It's just that I don't like that in Ant-Man. It shouldn't have been an Ant-Man, because now your big bad guy is Hank Pym's past. Everything else is kind of muddled. You've got two villains in Ghost and Sonny Birch that are relatively newer villains that you could have had a lot of fun with, but now you're almost turning Ghost from this corporate espionage type mercenary villain into almost like a Nebula style, is she a good guy or is she a bad guy? Especially with the post-credit sequence, we don't know exactly what her status is, so we don't know if she'll be around for the second fight against Thanos. Possibly could be there. So we don't really know what's going on with her, and the kind of the character development that we saw in some of the characters just seemed a little bit shorted because of that ambiguity. And I know in the last time when we talked about the importance of both female roles and also Asian American roles with Randall Park as Jimmy Woo, and then also I think there's kind of a little bit of a defunct African American influence too with the casting decisions of both Ghost and Goliath being black. There's a little bit of an overlap there too in terms of strong African American presence. It's just that if everybody's so ambiguous, you had like, is this the cast? Is this the characters to do the ambiguity with? Or is it more along the lines of other people? And could have been a better use by the MCU to use different characters? And I think that's kind of where your argument heads towards anyway. The execution may not be as good as the attempt. And it creates enough where it makes the movie just not as good as it could have been for me.
Oh, yeah. And I had touched on this a little bit when I discussed Deadpool 2, and that, sequels or, two-parters, they kind of have this or at least a lot of them have this thing that they suffer from, that where they either cling too much to the first movie and they end up, becoming so similar that, it's like, well, why did you even make a second one? It's too much like the first one. Or they go too far and it loses completely anything that would have drawn somebody to the movies in the first place. So, it is sort of a struggle, I think, as a writer to kind of, make you kind of to find that balance, whereas, a second movie is different and it offers something more, and yet it still retains a little bit of that magic that was captured in the first movie. It's a very hard line to walk. So unfortunately, I don't think Ant-Man and the Wasp did it as well as Deadpool 2. I think they could have done at least a few things differently to at least make it a little bit stronger, even if they wanted to go this route of having ambiguous villains and having nebulous heroes and things like that. I think they could have at least gone in a little bit different direction to make it a little bit stronger, instead of, just kind of redoing the first movie, just slightly different, in other words.
I agree. And I think the two characters that really had to make the difference there were Johnny Woo and Sonny Birch. And I thought that those were pretty straightforward type supporting roles. I am going to say that I called it, that Walton Goggins was the most typecast actor ever to appear in an MCU movie.
Yep.
And he definitely was typecast. He played the same role that he played in Justified. He played the same role that he played in Tomb Raider. It's just the same thing, and very, very unfortunate and lame. But, I mean, the character didn't have a lot to it, and instead of having the second post-credit sequence be the ant drumming, it could have had, like, that throwback to, like, a Justin Hammer with Sam Rockwell, or anybody, AIM, Yellowclaw, anything. Could have been anybody that could have directly tied, Sonny Birch to one of his buyers. And it didn't. It kind of passed on it because I think the bigger deal was the snapping of like how that played out. And so, I mean, I thought those supporting roles really didn't play into driving things enough. But I did like, on the other hand, because I don't want to say like it wasn't a bad movie.
Yeah.
It's just like, what does it fit in the MCU? And one of the things that I thought worked really well was the justification of the romance between Scott Lang and Hope.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of doing it through the Louise little, like, act everything out and have the characters act out the script to Michael Peña's character saying it out loud. I thought that was whimsical, and it got the point across without bogging down the movie, while also giving a throwback to how the previous movie went. I thought that was a really good job.
Oh yeah, I absolutely loved his character. That was honestly one of my favorite sequences in the whole movie, was him with the truth serum and just spilling everything from the...
Well, it's not a truth serum.
Oh, yes, of course, it's not truth serum. And the guy's finally like, oh, it's truth serum. But it kind of almost reminded me a bit of Chunk from the Goonies, where he just starts spilling every little bad thing he's ever done. It kind of reminded me a little bit of that. So it kind of a little bit of nostalgia. I don't know if they intentionally did that, but it did kind of remind me of that.
Well, I think it helped hide one of the other big things, because I know that we've talked about female roles and female empowerment of the characters and stuff like that, and I'm sure we'll get into it further along. But one of the things that they did was the biggest opportunity to show the brilliance of Hope Van Dyne could be kind of controversial in its portrayal, because it wasn't Michelle Pfeiffer that was delivering Hope's lines. It was Paul Rudd.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have that portrayal aspect of like, all right, is this really the character that you want to express these things? Or is it the one that you want to really have a strong female role? And it was interesting in that regard, because of, at least that way, they kind of broke it up from it just being pure plot devices. Because that's, to me, that's what Janet Van Dyne was just pure plot device.
Oh, yeah.
And I was really, I mean, I saw that coming from a mile away. I'm not really truly upset about that portrayal, so much as I hate the fact that it was Hank Pym that got all the character development out of it, and very little of it was given to Hope Van Dyne.
Definitely. I mean, I think this is, again, just a Hollywood problem in general that leaks over into the MCU where, for whatever reason, it's hard to write a strong female character. And I mean, in my own writing, whenever I create characters, I just create a character and then some of them happen to be female. I don't think about, oh, is this character's female, so therefore we're going to do this and have certain, things that we address. I just, they're just a character. They just happen to be female, and I don't think most of the writers of Hollywood really get or understand that. And so when it comes to writing a female character that's going to be front and center, that's supposed to be a strong female character, she seems to fall into just a couple of different, like, I hate to say just types, and Hope Van Dyne comes across as, she is smart, she is talented, definitely. She can take care of herself, but she's also very cold. She's very mean. She's very brash. And even though she is professional, I mean, she just has this coldness about her. And it's like, you don't have to have that in a strong female character to be a strong female character. A strong female character can be sweet, they can be pretty, they can be feminine, and they can still be strong. That's not they're not mutually exclusive things. So, again, I think that's more of a Hollywood issue in general, and it just leaks over into the MCU. But yeah, that's just kind of my own 2 cents there.
No, it's totally good, because that's what a movie like this can help with discussing. It is kind of weird as a guy who's also white to kind of discuss some of these things sometimes, because you're not exactly sure where the line is at, mm-hmm. but you have to get closer to the line to find out where it is.
Yeah. Oh no, I definitely understand, and I like that it is a good step forward in that she is front and center. Even her name is in the title. It's kind of like all the characterization work that she had done in the first movie was basically just kind of canceled out. And it was like she was right back at square one. And it's like, if these characters have gone through certain things, they grow, they change, you should be able to see that in a second movie. And I didn't really see that for her, at least.
Well, that's the weird aspect of having a comparison movie. Mm-hmm. Is that now you're not dealing with individual growth, you're dealing with the foil. You're dealing with mirrors, you're dealing with equals. And what we saw in Ghost as a villain was panic and fear. And the result of that was highly problematic for the relationship between Goliath mm-hmm. and Ghost. That being said, when things got tough, Hope resorted back to a professionalism that allowed her to maybe be a little bit more stoic with the approach. Mm-hmm. When you're comparing the direct relationship between the two female characters as leads, as daughters, as the offsprings of a single parent type scenario. That direct comparison did not matter if they were male or female. Mm-hmm. That direct comparison dealt with, parent and child. Mm-hmm. So when you have ambiguous bad guys and multiple groups, kind of like I said before, the heroes, the villains, and the survivalists, when you have that ambiguity, you have an ensemble cast. And this was definitely an ensemble cast, and the growth and female-centric aspects of an ensemble cast are almost different in the way that I view it, in terms of developing a character, or at least developing equality on screen, mm-hmm. than what it would be if it was just a title character and their progression as the main feature. But with it being all over the place with an ensemble movie like this, the comparisons rule. And I didn't think that the comparisons for any of the characters were gender specific.
Yeah, it comes back, I think, to execution, because even in a comparison movie, you should still see character growth and development, because even in those comparison stories, obviously there are foils, but even so, those individual characters will at least show some character progression, at least, especially if they've already previously been established and had their own, had kind of a moment in the first movie, kind of like, this is the second movie. So the first movie has happened and, things have happened and people have grown and changed a little bit. And to basically go back to square one just for the sake of a foil, it again, and this was my issue with Infinity War as well, it just speaks to lazy writing, where there's a lot of balance, obviously, that you have to take into consideration to make sure that individual characters and their growths aren't completely stunted by the story. And at the same time, obviously any one character's growth can't take over the story and take away that comparison foil that we've been talking about. But again, and this is, as I've extensively said, I have issues with it. It just smacks of lazy writing. They should just try to go the easy route, and unfortunately, different things suffer because of it.
Well, I think we've dealt with that subject a little bit. Let's go to something a little bit more lighthearted, if you don't mind. And I know that you wanted to talk about the Stan Lee cameo.
Yes. That was such a great moment. Honestly, I think one of the best Stan Lee cameos in recent memory, at least. I mean, Stan obviously has filmed cameos for, several movies into the future. And I'm not sure if he's filmed them with specific movies in mind or just filmed them, just in general. But I mean, this honestly is one of my favorites. It kind of is just a really big throwback to its own history, really. And I just really loved it. It honestly it literally made me laugh out loud when I saw it. It was fantastic.
It was nice to see a funny one after Infinity Wars.
Yes.
Because there's been some different ones where he has been not very fun. It hasn't been a joyful moment. That being said, the MCU has definitely gotten a little bit looser with their adult jokes. Mm-hmm. I mean, the strip club scene in the first Deadpool with his cameo there, or
that was an R-rated movie too.
It was, but I mean the fade away into the Samuel L. Jackson mother effer. Mm-hmm. in Avengers, or the orgy joke in Ragnarok, that definitely did not resonate well with my mother when I saw that with her. There's a couple of more adult centric jokes here, but it is interesting to see how some of these movies are growing older with the target demographic, because that was something that came up too in The Incredibles 2.
Oh yeah,
is that there were multiple scenes that dealt with like parent situations, and also multiple scenes that showed casual alcohol use.
Yeah, and I think it's more of a thing where I don't want to say kids movies, but kid friendly movies. At least quite a few of them have had moments where it's kind of like an in joke, and so like the adults will get it, but like the kids, it'll just fly right over their heads, or at least for most of them it will. And I think the MCU has definitely gotten a little bit more fast and loose with it, but I kind of enjoy it so far, at least for me. And I also, I know we've already said Lewis that with his scene was like one of my absolute favorite scenes in the movie, with him recounting the story. But another one of my favorite sequences in the movie was with Randall Park's character of Agent Wu. He's just this wonderful, I mean, he plays a straight man, but he's like, his character is one that's like unintentionally funny, and the way that he carries this off is awesome. I absolutely loved it. He's one of my favorite parts in the movie, because every time he's on screen, he's either his facial expression is like, something quirky, or he says something that, he's doesn't mean it to be funny, but it is kind of funny. And I thought that was awesome. I thought he was absolutely excellent. I'm really sorry to kind of, for the movie to be over, just because I wanted to kind of see more of him.
I agree. I thought Randall Park's portrayal, given the circumstances, was spot on. I just hated that role.
Oh, yeah. It was very limited.
It was, but to me, in terms of fixing the mistakes of Iron Man's past, in the overall arcing MCU, they balked again. They could have went in. Johnny Woo was a huge influence and had some of his own comic books and had some really great storylines with regards to the West Coast and the West Coast Avengers, as well as the overarching aspects of Iron Man and Red China, Communist China. It wasn't just Hydra, it wasn't just Nazis that people were fighting. As comic books evolved, communism was definitely something that was brought up, and the historical propaganda was there, but also there's the traditional bad guys of the USSR and China were there. And but again, one of the things about China in comic portrayals was that there were a lot of good people in China, and there were a lot of really good sympathetic characters that I think with the success of the MCU could right probably a bigger wrong. I don't want to say bigger, but a more overlooked wrong in terms of casting decisions, which is Asian American and just Asian influence. As of right now, there's basically two Asians that have been in all of the MCU, and one of them plays Mantis, which is not a human at all.
Yeah.
So now your one and only Asian depiction on Earth is a straight man. So I mean that's a huge issue. And Randall Park, I like the guy. I think the guy's super funny. But with the MCU, if they were going to make Johnny Woo a strong character, that opens up Yellow Claw, that opens up AIM back again. It opens up all your West Coast storylines, and it can take some of the stuff fixed from Hank Pym to move a little bit forward. And now none of that is there whatsoever, and you've just killed off an entire huge chunk of the Marvel library that you've always had the rights to, and it just seems like a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, although the thing is we don't know what is really going to happen after this, after basically the second part of Infinity War with the next Avengers movie that comes out. So, I really have no idea how they're going to go about with this. What is it, Phase 4, I think? But I hope that whatever they do to, address what happened in Infinity War and the snapping, I hope it does kind of come back around to where we could access those storylines, because, I mean, like you said, there's tons of stuff out there, tons of storylines. I mean, obviously, there's the bigger ones, like Infinity War, like Civil War and things like that, but there's tons of storylines out there that they could use that's great. But, when they make certain decisions in regards to how they set up their universe in their own little bubble, because that is basically what they do. They just write, make their own little universe and say, okay, this is the canon for this universe. It might not be comic verse, but it's the movie verse. And, so maybe, hopefully in the future that could come about. I don't know. I mean, I like to try to remain hopeful as possible, but, I guess we'll just have to wait and see how the next Avengers plays out.
Yeah, I think this Avengers will wrap things up. I think the big question about how Phase 4 will go will be primarily led by the Spider-Man Away From Home, as well as Captain Marvel. Just because Captain Marvel, with the Sony acquisition, you can get all those Secret Invasion storylines going. And that would allow the ability to replace some actors and actresses without any question. But again, the Secret Invasion, unless you're recycling characters and have a plan for recasting, there's some of them that aren't going to mesh very well, and you're gonna have to replace characters in that regard, and it will be a bigger issue with Phase 4 than it has been in the past.
As they expand and as they bring in more characters and more storylines, everything obviously will get more complicated, and I think this is part of maybe the issues with Ant-Man and the Wasp, because it happens after Civil War and it happens right before Infinity War. And, so there are some effects from Civil War that are still filtering through, obviously, with Ant-Man being under house arrest for most of the movie, or supposed to be at least. It obviously will limit you. And then at the end with the post-credit scene, obviously, like, pretty much everything in the movie was wiped out. Everything that happened, everything that was achieved, all of the growth that the characters made was pretty much invalidated. And I think that's really what kind of made me irritated with it. If anybody has listened to the Infinity War episode, they know how much I really dislike Infinity War and how they executed it. And, so the next time I watch Ant-Man and the Wasp, I'm probably just going to skip that post-credit scene, because without it, I think it's probably honestly better, But...
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody in the theater that I watched it with was upset.
Oh yeah,
because
I can
it
imagine.
drastically changes the tone of the entire experience.
Yeah, because I mean the whole movie was, kind of. I think you mentioned it's kind of like a Scooby Doo chase, movie. Trying to get this and get that, and oh, we've got to get back to the house before the agents get there. And then at the end of the movie itself, everything seems to have worked out fine, and he's off house arrest, he's hanging out with his daughter, and everything seems cool, and then all of a sudden, it happens, in the post-credit scene, and it's like, okay, so we basically just wasted that whole movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the weird thing about how that end post credit scene worked out, is that even though that it gives you a timeline and it tells you why those characters weren't in Infinity Wars, it also goes in and tells you a little bit more about who's left remaining. Because I know when Kevin Feige went and talked about who's left that we haven't seen yet, and they had said Hank Pym and Hope Van Dyne were too important to say. Well, we know now why. But we've got new characters that have that access to technology in terms of Bill Foster and Ghost, that if they're doing that for Ghost, it's not like they can't pull him out of the quantum zone.
So I guess, again, we'll just have to wait and see, and maybe Infinity War will address that. Maybe we'll have to wait for another movie. I don't know. Like I said, I kind of wish they hadn't have done that in the post-credit scene, just because it completely just throws off the whole movie.
I appreciated the jokes. I thought that it was not forced in terms of anything. There wasn't a joke that I groaned at, like kind of like a James Bond style joke. Everything seemed to be more natural and witty in its banter. And I thought the job there by T.I. and David Dasselman as Dave and Kurt, along with Louise, definitely helped out with that. And it made it nice to have a little bit of comic relief that didn't seem forced.
Oh yeah, I think certain characters and certain kind of realms of the MCU kind of tend towards comedy a little bit better than others. And I think this is one where, it was appropriate and they didn't go too overboard. It was kind of balanced well with the rest of the movie as far as like the plot development and the action that was going on. So, unlike I think Thor Ragnarok, where the comedy kind of overtook at certain points, at inappropriate points, I think it was, very appropriately sprinkled out throughout this movie. So yeah, I definitely agree that was one of the things that actually did make me like the movie overall, was just the nice balance in that regard.
The other thing too is that I do appreciate Abby Ryder-Fortson, who plays Cassie, the daughter. I think out of all the players at hand, she had the least opportunity to make a positive impact, but her character was unquestionably there.
Oh yeah, she. Her character is really weaved throughout both of the movies because, even though she doesn't get that much screen time, she really influences Paul Rudd's character in, everything that he does and everything he strives for. And then when she is on screen, it's perfect. It's everything that she is built up to be. And I know not all child actors are the greatest. I know sometimes it's difficult, acting when you are that age, but she absolutely nailed it. I think that was perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Brice, for getting nerdy with us today. So why don't you talk nerdy to us? What did you think of Ant-Man and the Wasp? Did you think it was a good sequel, or did it fall a little flat for you? You can find Beauties and Headcanons on Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr to share your nerdy topic suggestions. Subscribe to this podcast and others from Public House Media on iTunes, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and wherever good podcasts are found. Also, don't forget, we do have a store at thephmedia.com. You can click on the shop link, and we have show merch, where everything from iPhone covers to bags to t-shirts to coffee mugs. You can rep our show wherever you are. We also love feedback, so if you like this episode, or even if you didn't, just give us a rating and a review so we can keep making great episodes for you. I'm Elisabeth, and thanks for getting nerdy with us on Beauties and Headcanons.